This is Reimagining Higher Education, your go-to podcast with remarkable education leaders sharing personal stories from their experience in and around the sector, including reflections and hope for progress in education. With your host, Professor Judyth Sachs, former PVC Learning and Teaching at the University of Sydney, Deputy Vice Chancellor and Provost at Macquarie University, Special Advisor in Higher Education at KPMG, and now Chief Academic Officer at Studiosity. Welcome.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce our most recent member of the American Academic Advisory Board. He is a leader, a learner, and has driven change both at the faculty level but the whole institution level. So you've been a dean, you've been a president, now you're a chancellor. Could you talk to us about your journey as a learner and a leader? And I asked you to bring an object that represents your journey as a learner and a leader. So David, as we say in Australia, over to you.
Perfect, and thank you. Thanks so much for having me. This is so much fun, to reflect on your career and think about what's next for higher education. And it's just been a privilege to be in the space. And I brought with me several pictures, and this is literally a class photo of me, believe it or not, in the first grade through the sixth grade. My mother, who is 91 years old, sent me these about 6 months ago. She was cleaning out some things, and it had all of the pictures of me in class. And I bring them because I tell people that I like school so much that I just stayed. I didn't leave. I never left. I have just always been a fan of education, always loved school. You'll see in these pictures, if you could see them a little more closely, I'm always close to the teacher. I prefer to think it's because I was the teacher's pet. Others remind me that the most problematic child in the classroom has to sit by the teacher. So I don't remember which it was, maybe a little of both. But I've always liked school. And what I appreciate now is that school comes to us as much as we go to school. And now I find myself not being able to get away from school. I'm 24/7. You are somehow engaged in the learning process, and both as a chancellor and as a student and a faculty member, all the way across the board. So I get to do what I love day in and day out, and literally have never left school.
Well, that's a great way for us to start, because during your career, you have been a dean, you have been as I said before, a president and now a chancellor. When you look at that picture and you reflect on what schools are like today, what comes to mind in terms of, apart from the haircuts, what are the great difference in terms of pedagogy, learning, and the experience of students?
I think the best thing, and I think the thing that we should all be the most proud of, is that we're getting closer and closer to actually meeting students where they are. Meeting students where they are in life, meeting students where they are in their geographical location. And it's not just about online versus face-to-face. It really is creating more access to better learning opportunities by understanding who our students are and being able to deliver a much more personalized approach. I think we're just starting to understand that, even though I've been talking about it for 30 years. How do we better personalize the student experience, and how do we know enough about them and have enough information to deliver on demand, just in time, just enough? And I think we're closer than we've ever been. The technology allows us to do this, and there's actually no reason for us to hold back delivering a learning experience as high quality and meet students where they are. And I'm more excited now than I was when we first started talking about this 30 years ago. And it's a wonderful opportunity that's right at our, I used to say it's at our fingertips, but now it's in our ears and in our eyes with glasses, and it's not just at our fingertips. The information we need to help students learn is getting closer and closer to the learner, and we're getting more and more personalized on a weekly basis, it seems like.
So when you reflect back to your time as a student, both in school and in college, were there any teachers, lecturers that really stood out for you as inspiring you to learn and inspiring you to perform? And If there were, what did they do that created that excitement and that curiosity?
That's a great question, and I have a very specific answer. I started my career in community college. At the time, it was called junior college in Florida, in the United States. I thought I was going to be a football player. I went to college thinking I was going to play football at Auburn University. That was a short-lived career. I've had a long career, but that one wasn't long. And I ended up back in junior college, not knowing what I was going to do. And I took a developmental psychology class, and I'm a developmental psychologist by training. And the young professor was so inspiring, so caring, so committed, so knowledgeable about children and their growth and their development that within 3 days of taking that course, in her course, I said, I want to do what she does. I literally decided I wanted to be a professor that day. I mean, that week, that first week. And so she inspired me in many different ways. And then I had the same mentor across 3 different institutions, my undergraduate, my master's, and my doctoral, but were all done in 3 different institutions. But I kept following the same professor. So, staying close to those teachers, was evident in these pictures, but it kind of followed my career all the way along. And the funny thing about the teacher back at Pensacola Junior College, her name was Marilyn Leftwich. I didn't know her name at that. I couldn't remember her name, but I remembered her throughout my entire first part of my career. And that same Pensacola State College, as it's called now, gave me a Lifetime Achievement Award about 6 years ago. And in the award ceremony, they asked the same question, what inspired you? And I said, I had this professor, I don't even know her name. And she doesn't know what I do. I don't think she knows that I was in her class. And they obviously helped track her down. And she was retiring that year from a community college in Colorado. So I got to reach out to her. And the point was, so many teachers and so many professors have found impact on a student that they never realized was that they were part of their trajectory. And she was a very significant part of my trajectory. And I was just so both honored and fortuitously pleased that I was able to reach out to her the year she was retiring from her own career as an academic. So it was a very exciting time.
So what was it about her? Was it a personal thing? Was it a competence thing? Was it a passion thing? What was it about?
It was a passion thing. You could tell she was just so excited about that content. And I've always had a real passion for developmental trajectories of children and people in general, human development, child development. And she somehow tapped into that passion. And I related to the way she was talking about people, the way people grow and develop. And it was just that simple. And our interaction was literally one course. And I suspect she didn't know. I know because I talked to her. She didn't know who I was, that I was in her class.
But she actually changed your life. That's a great story. Can we just go back to your time as a football player? Because being a team player inculcates particular dispositions that you can also carry on in life. So I don't know what position you played, and I know one thing's for sure, you didn't play rugby.
No, did not.
So what was it about being a member of the team that you carried on throughout your life as well?
That's a great question. And, I believe strongly in social connections and relationships and the importance of those relationships. And now we're discovering they don't necessarily have to be face to face. I stay in touch with a lot of team members from my past, both athletically. I'm still engaged in a number of different sports. I'm a tennis player, at this point in my life, and have been for a long time. And I coached tennis for a while at Ohio State, and the women's tennis team at Ohio State. And that team camaraderie, as well as kind of the motivational aspects of being on a team, working for each other. Some people are better motivated by team structures and group structures than individual structures. Some not. Some choose to do individual things. I think the point is for those who are looking for a collaborative experience, they're great. But it doesn't mean it's for everybody. It certainly worked for me. But I've also had students over the years who really do prefer to do their work alone. And I meet them where they are as a faculty member, met them where they are. And I think the same is true for our faculty and other administrators. I mean, some people, it's the dosage of social interaction that varies across individuals. And I think we need to be respectful of that as you develop leadership skills, you need to be respectful that there are those that thrive best in, heavily infused social environments and others who are not antisocial. They just have different styles of getting their work done. And I think being able to sort that out and respond to that, to the way people are best performing is really important.
And what's your preferred style?
My preferred style is a combination of collaborative and some individual work. I also think there's an importance of getting to know people at a personal level so that you can handle the more difficult situations that come up. If we don't know people well and we have superficial relationships, then it's really when a difficult issue, a decision or an implementation of a layoff of individuals, a change in direction, change management really is kind of dependent upon the relationships that you have to handle these difficult conversations. And if you don't have some, I call them tennis ball messages, if you don't have things that are not consequential if they're dropped, and you don't practice with each other on easy messages, and delivering those hard messages, are very challenging. And so my style is to be as social as possible and to have as deeper relationships as I possibly can and use those relationships so that you can tackle tough issues together.
So moving on to your career as a senior leader, National University, private university in California, very different from UMass Global. Can you just talk to us briefly about what each university is like and what you've taken from both of them in terms of your commitment to higher education and learning?
That's a really good question, and it's one that I think about a lot. I spent a good portion of my career at AAU institutions, the most selective institutions in the United States. Certainly 6 years at Johns Hopkins University as an elite, highly selective institution. At the time I was there, we took the School of Education to the #1 ranked graduate school in the country. We did that purely by picking the right players. You're talking about continuing the sports analogy. We just picked the right players. We picked the right faculty. We handpicked the right students. It was hard to get in. And when you have the ability to pick whoever you want to be on your team, you should beat most people. I mean, you really should have a pretty high winning percentage, and they do. Our elite institutions do. I left Johns Hopkins University and went to National University, which is actually more like UMass Global, certainly more like it than Hopkins and Johns Hopkins. And it was about access. It was about embracing meeting students where they are and opening the aperture for who gets into the institution, and then celebrating the growth trajectory of those students rather than where they ended up at the end of the day. Where they ended up at the end of the day is mostly determined by where they started. And the elite institutions have the ability to take that selectivity and turn it into wonderful outcomes. The big challenge is having great outcomes with students that show up. I wouldn't say Sandlot, but it's pretty much, those who you meet students where they are and you try to get them to the next level in a value added way so that there's a return on their investment in their learning. That was more energizing to me than the highly selective institution where almost anything works. We developed a PhD program there when I was at Johns Hopkins, and I joked that teaching those students that we handpicked, the first 8 that we picked had the highest GRE scores in the nation. You could walk into the classroom and throw a book in the corner and walk out without saying a word. Come back 12 weeks later, and they'd be asking you, what else do we need to know? And it was just that simple. And it's not an exaggeration. And so almost anything works. When you meet students where they are, you really have both the responsibility and the opportunity to personalize to their needs and their specific goals coming into the institution. And for me, it's much more energizing and exciting. And I can't believe it took me that long to make that shift, because there's an envy of the more selective institutions. It's pervasive in higher education. Everybody wants to be at the next tier, and the next tier is more defined by their selectivity than anything else. And so you feel this pressure to keep moving up the ladder to more elite institutions and join that club that is defined by selectivity. And I think it took a little courage to take the step away from that and back into a more open access institution. And UMass Global is the University of Massachusetts parallel to a more open access institution that meets students where they are with an online delivery system.
So just picking up on that, meeting students where they are, as you were talking, I thought you're actually talking about both ends of the continuum, the students who need help and the students that need to be extended. So meeting the students where they are, those students, they were going to learn regardless of what you did at the top end, but the ones who were at the sort of the lower end, they actually needed that personal. So can you just tell me some of the things that you discovered worked and how you, in some respects, this is the wrong word, but emancipated students from their sometimes the very poor quality of education that they'd received, so that they were opened up to new horizons and new opportunities?
Well, it kind of goes back to this notion of groups and social interaction and kind of how we treat groups of students as they progress through our system. And it's still pretty much an assembly line approach. All of these students that were sitting with me in the first grade, we all experienced the same thing for the same length of time because we were first graders. And the next year we experienced what second graders experience. The next year, third graders. And then we get into college and we all experience the same thing because we're all in the same course. And we all experience for the same amount of time too. A course is a course, and it lasts for a fixed amount of time. And what you learn in that is dependent upon how much time you spent trying to learn it, not outcomes related to how much you've specifically learned. So, what I find is that competency-based education, where you can provide self-based, on-demand types of support, actually gives you better interactions with students than walking into the front of a classroom, spending time with them. And in the United States, we have very strict guidelines about how much time you spend with groups of students. Regular and substantive interaction with students by the faculty member. I won awards for lecturing for decades. It was just because I was funny. I was a little bit engaging. I would pay attention to making the assessments doable and fair, but it wasn't a great learning experience. Now I see students in an online setting where we have such rich information about how they're progressing in the class, whether they're doing the assignments, what's the outcome of those assignments, what are their questions, and being able to answer those questions at 2 o'clock in the morning rather than waiting till next Wednesday when we reconvened at 9:30 a.m. And that responsiveness, both from people and from chatbots, is getting us a better lift in growth. That when we talk about the value add of growth, meeting students where they are, taking them to the next level, that really requires a personalization that we haven't seen before. And it leads to just as close a relationship with those students as I had, probably closer relationship than what I had if I walked into a class of 75 students, 150 students, and lectured for 45 minutes and then walked out. And then 3 graduate assistants actually tried to make some kind of meaningful connection with them. Now our students are expecting response within shorter and shorter periods of time. And as much as we need to be careful about the next generation of AI, it's allowing us to be responsive in time frames that we've never seen before. and students, our students, working adult students who have full-time job and 3 children at home, they're doing their work at 2:30 in the morning. I don't have any faculty members that are up at 2:30 in the morning, ready to respond to a question in seconds that comes across a chat bot. But we do have agents now who are being supervised and monitored by faculty members who are not on their own. They're not working as independent entities, but that are providing much more timely and responsive and sometimes more accurate information, as much as none of our faculty want to hear, than we get from our faculty members. And it's just so exciting to be in this space.
Look, I read in my research finding out about you that you're a lifelong educator committed to equity and access through personalized student-centric approaches. What's the genesis or the foundation of that? Because your whole career and everything you've talked to me about today really reinforces that. So where did that come from?
I don't know where it came from, except, I really do believe deeply that individuals grow and develop at their own pace, in their own style, their own way, and that independence and kind of personal trajectory is important. So it starts with my fascination with growth and development and how it takes off in different directions, how the speed changes, I'm just fascinated by how individuals grow and develop. And, it's funny, early in my career, I had colleagues who were gerontologists and they had the same passion for aging, and how aging changes. And at the time, I had no interest in that. And I would teach lifespan development, and I would teach a whole course in lifespan development. And by the time the course was over, the individuals we were talking about would be maybe 14 years old. I had colleagues in gerontology who by week 2, they were talking about, 80-year-olds. And, the lifespan trajectory of growth and changes was always fascinating. But, now I find myself more interested in the other end of the lifespan than I've ever been. But it's the same principle, is that, how do we respect the individual trajectories in growth and development, not just pace, but directions, choices, preferences, and then respond to that. One of the things that's not as clear on my resume is that one of the most fascinating things that we did when we were at Johns Hopkins, we built one of the first new schools in infants through 8th grade in Baltimore in 25 years in an abandoned neighborhood. And my wife and I lived in that neighborhood while we built that school. Henderson Hopkins, it's called. And what was interesting in building the school is we tried to design a space that allowed this level of grouping and regrouping and personalization. And it worked to an extent, but we're so grounded in this classroom notion that we move in groups in fixed order that even in a wide open setting, when you get to design the entire architecture of a school, you're kind of bound by this mindset that, 3rd graders are with a 3rd grade teacher. And one interesting kind of anecdote from building that school, and it showed me how difficult it is to personalize. And we had some big open spaces where we could regroup and group kids. And I told the teachers, you cannot have a classroom. I'm not going to let you put your name on a classroom, because I want you moving with the kids and being with those kids who can most benefit for what you're delivering at one point in time, and then perhaps regroup and deliver that to other kids. So, so it's not about building a relationship with one group of kids for a fixed period of time. I went in as we were finishing up the building, and I was giving a tour, and I looked, and on every door frame of a space that looked to be about the size of a classroom, a teacher had taken a piece of masking tape and put their name on it on the door because it was their classroom. I mean, they really couldn't get away from the notion that classes should be more fluent and individuals in those classes are more important than the group progress itself from the beginning of the school year to the end of the school year. And, it really reinforced to me that we still have a long way to go in personalizing this experience. And, sooner or later we'll get there.
If you were to do that again today, have that opportunity to create a new school, what would you do differently? Because I absolutely understand that, having been a teacher myself, that territoriality, my class is my private space. What would you do differently?
I think we have to infuse the next generation of teachers with the different mindset about what their job is. And maybe even change the word teacher. I mean, we need learning facilitators and coaches, and the notion that, I see it on plaques all the time. We need a great teacher in front of every classroom. There is so much wrong with that statement. We don't need them in front of the classroom. We need them embedded in the classroom, and we don't even need a classroom. I mean, we need people with learners in ways that advance those individual learners towards their own, objectives and the return on the investment. So I think we have to redefine and I think AI is going to help us do that. Redefine what a learning facilitator means. Just teaching has I think we're also tied to a visual image of what a teacher is and what a teacher does. It's hard for us to get away from that into thinking about learning rather than, does learning occur without teaching? Yeah, all the time. And we don't want to admit that. And then one observation that I've had over the years is that people like me who love school so much that they didn't want to leave are now in charge of trying to lead the change that we love so much. I mean, teachers became teachers because they loved what traditional teachers do. And they were good at it. They loved it and they were good at it. And so they just kept doing it, just like me. And so kind of leaving that challenge to the traditional school structure creates some barriers to adoption. And faculty are the same way. Faculty in higher education stayed in it because they liked it and they were good at it. But they're not going to be as good at it in the future because, we have other tools that won't replace them, but will dramatically change what their responsibilities are. I welcome students in India now. We have a growing population of students in India with my avatar. I write the text for my avatar. They meet at ungodly times in the United States, and I want to welcome every student. So the avatar does it. Can't tell it's not me. We acknowledge it up front, but it's and I change the text and personalize the text for the group that I'm addressing, and it seems to be working at that point. So it's not taking my job away. It's taking my travel away to India on a regular basis, but it's a fascinating time in higher ed.
I'd love to pick up on the AI inflection point in education, but really ask, there are both pros and cons in terms of the implementation of AI. And for many, 3 years ago, it was the Chicken Little, the sky was falling, everything was going to change, and then there was the moving away from policing, and now it's in a completely different phase. Can I ask you to think about what's the impact on teachers' practice, given that you've talked about teachers' practice using AI, but also the benefits to students? And you've mentioned it in other answers, particularly around the personalised learning and meeting students where they are. But in terms of academics, what needs to change in terms of academic practice in classrooms to be student-centred and to deliver a personalised experience?
A lot needs to change, and I'll start there. What we're finding is that a couple of things. One is things that repetitive content delivery should never be your primary job. I don't care how good you are in delivering content. There's always somebody better. There's somebody that spent. I used to do a lecture for 10 minutes on my own. Somebody spent $3 million to develop that same 10 million and have tested it against responses to that content delivery. So I can't compete with that. So delivering content. Now, building relationships is still a primary part of the job, but not every student wants a relationship or needs a relationship. This is a misconception too. I mean, students that need a relationship and want a relationship and are benefiting from a learning relationship need to have it. I mean, I had the closest relationships with my academic mentors, with people along the way who I sought out or they sought me out to have a relationship. What people don't want to hear is that 95% of the students that I've interacted with over the years, both as a professor, as an administrator, I had no relationship with. It was transactional. Or parts of the relationship were transactional, and a few parts of the relationship were relationship based. So what both data and AI is allowing us to do is target those students that need something just in time from a relationship standpoint, or need a long-term relationship. It doesn't matter. And deploying our human capital in ways that maximize those opportunities. So a teacher is not trying to develop a rich relationship with everybody that there's, and I wouldn't say, I talk about it's assigned to them, not their classroom. I mean, so their teaching load is not a class, it's the individuals within a group. And you may have people within the group that you're responsible for that are in very different places in their learning journey, even within a course. So being able to respond to that with a relationship-based approach is not realistic economically, nor is it desired by a large number of our students. But when you want it, you need it, and we can identify those that need it and deliver those things in a cost-effective kind of way. So I think that's the core, is that, but most, faculty is going to be a steep learning curve to move in that direction. What I'm most excited about with the change is that, faculty, it presses all of us to think differently about not only how people learn, but what they need to learn and why, and how we assess what they're learning and document the credential. Because students come to us for two reasons. They come here to learn, but they also come for the credential. And I would say the credential probably carries more value than the learning itself. People probably don't want to hear that, but it's true. I mean, they come for the credential in higher education. And, when they get that credential, so we do two things. We help them learn, and then we credential that learning. And it's kind of like judge and jury, at the same time, that we're moving people along this learning continuum. Now, when we think about what people are learning and why, we really have to rework the assessments. We have to rework the program outcomes and the course outcomes, because I have things at my fingertips and increasingly coming into my ears that I used to need to know. I don't need to know that anymore. I need to know how to get to it and how to get to it fast, and how to critically think about judging the value of that information and where it came from and referencing and lots of things. But faculty have to be involved in rethinking assessments of what people need to demonstrate in terms of skills and knowledge. And I say that's becoming increasingly a more important part of their job than what we did in the past.
So what are the principles underlying that rethinking assessment in the AI environment?
I think authentic assessments with really well-defined rubrics. We used to, do a couple multiple choice, do some essay writing, worry about who wrote the essay. Oh, by the way, 30 years ago, we worried about people come. We didn't check IDs when people came in to do their test in institutions. We assumed it was a student. Now we're finding out sometimes it was not. But so we've got this identity issue, but that's not the real problem with the assessments. The assessments is really, can you align what people need to be able to demonstrate in terms of skills and knowledge with a rubric that is detailed enough and that is clear enough that, one, is fair to the student, and two, it can be taken outside of the professor's knowledge base in their head and codified into a rubric that can be automatically scored. And can you do that with authenticity? Can you do that around authentic projects that have aligned rubrics? We just launched an MBA program with an AI grading tool in it that gives the information to the professor. I was pushing for a student-facing AI feedback tool. We'll get one, but we don't trust the outcomes yet. So professors are looking at these outcomes, and I was tracking how much they were actually changing the AI outcomes and having to modify it based on either inaccurate information, incomplete information, or just their preference in what they would deliver in terms of feedback. And, when you do that, it exposes major flaws in your rubric. And I spent a good portion of my career doing observational research with children. And, if you're going to code things based on what category does this behavior fall in, you have to be really explicit in the language you use about the rubrics that you're using for a coding scheme. And you do a lot of inter-observer checking to make sure that two people are seeing it the same way and getting the same. We don't do any of that in grading. We've never done that in grading. And so there's a whole level of expertise that goes into these assessment designs that makes it a better experience, a more fair experience for the students. Certainly give you time. We were giving our professors 78 hours to do this. He's come back in 7.2 seconds or less. Now, the time it takes for the professor to review it and vet it and validate it, takes it back up. I didn't have a lot of professors raising their hands saying, what took me 78 hours is now taking me 10 minutes. But we'll get there. And it's a better experience for the students, and certainly more part of our drive to lower the cost of education as well. Because part of access that we haven't talked about is the cost of higher education. And these efficiencies, if we don't use these efficiencies to lower the cost of access, to improve access by lowering the cost, then we've missed a really a good opportunity, and shame on us.
But as you're also talking, I'm thinking about it will have implications on workload. So what is the work of an academic, and how do you define load? So just briefly, how do you manage expectations in terms of the productivity? So they're not spending all this time doing assessment and grading. How are they going to spend that time that they've saved to do things that are part of their workload? Or do you have to redefine workload completely?
You have to do a redefinition of workload, because workload has been on courses. Historically, we've done how many courses do you teach as your workload? How much time do you have for research and service as the two other legs of the stool? We see we have systems where we talk about how many students you support, and that changes based upon the level of the degree program. How many doctoral students you can support through a dissertation is very different than how many students you can support in a general ed course that has a grading tool, a highly efficient grading tool tied to it. So the volume and the variation has to be personalized for the individual professor. And we just eliminated a group of professors. We didn't eliminate the professors, we changed their title. They have been running our competency-based education, which is self-paced. And to do that, you'll have students at very different places in the same course. So you might be teaching, responsible for 5 sets of content that we used to call courses. And there might be 5 students in each of those courses but they started at different times. So you got 25 people on 25 journeys that look quite different, but your load is 25 to 1 in terms of serving those students and supporting those students. So what we see is the ability to change that ratio, and there'll be pushback to 50 to 1. And the connotation is, oh, how could you handle that? You can handle it with the efficiency that comes from the time you used to spend doing tasks that can now be automated. And you're always looking at those 50 students to figure out which 2 are not being challenged enough. We talk about elite institutions and not meeting students where they are. Which 2 have already run through the content in 2 weeks? And there's 10 weeks left. What are you going to do with those? What are we going to do with the other 10 weeks? How do you modify the program to let them move on to the next level? And then how do you find the 2 or 3 that just haven't engaged at all, or who are constantly having struggles in digesting the content and coming up with the appropriate assessment responses to move forward in the class? So your time then of that 50 is not equally distributed across every student in the class. We used to believe that everyone deserves the same amount of attention. They don't want the same amount of attention, nor do they need the same amount of attention. And if the challenge before you move to a self-paced model is that when they're done, and then they're just wasting their time. So you got to figure out, how do you get them in the next class? How do you get them in the next group of learning activities? How do you scaffold to get them a deeper understanding of what they've already learned? And that really pushes faculty to, and I would, to be honest, most faculty embrace that as a great opportunity. because most faculty do this to help students learn. And if they can help students learn better, faster, easier, nobody wants to say easier, but if we can make learning easier and more efficient, most faculty are all in. They want to know what it means for them in terms of their own, personal experience as a professor, but that's evolving too.
So what I'm hearing you saying is the experience will be characterized by flexibility and fluidity. Fluidity for students in terms of access and delivery, but flexibility in terms of how they engage with it and how it's delivered. That's a major workforce change.
It's a major change, and that's probably why it's been slow. But we've had such a standardized approach, and we have a whole currency thinking about workloads. It's based on this standardized approach. In the United States, Carnegie units. We created Carnegie units to standardize credit hours. I mean, that was the purpose, is so that you could take those credit hours and transfer them to other institutions, so that everybody knew what the currency was. It's like our different countries have currencies, so that everybody knows what a dollar means. Everybody knows what a unit means. And then those units become interoperable because we learn the currency. Now we're seeing even the degrees itself, as we look at micro-credentials and alternative certifications, we can't get our head around it because they don't fit the same currency model that we're used to. And by the way, that one currency model that we all understand is based on seat time, completely on seat time. How many hours you spent trying to learn something. We take our courses and we break them down into how many hours a week you should be in class, how many hours a week you should be doing work outside of class. And then our accreditation systems, at least in the United States, really lean on that to accredit you. I mean, so we're all forced into this currency, and it's very convenient because we understand it. You can have variation. You can have 8-week classes, 12-week classes, 16, but they're all a week. I mean, they all have fixed timelines associated with them until competency-based education came along. And to be honest, that's not being widely embraced. I mean, it's a slow start. It's a slug because, again, we were comfortable with units that are structured as you're in third grade because you're the age of a third grader. And it kind of all goes back to this standardization. And what we're talking about is de-standardizing so that we can personalize at scale. So, there are people in different industries talk about mass customization. So how do we get to mass customization in education at scale? And I don't think we're going to work ourselves out of a job anytime soon because it's going to take some dramatic changes to get there.
I've got 2 more questions.
Sure.
If we have this conversation again in 5 years' time, apart from us both having more wisdom that shows on our face, what sort of things do you think we'll be talking about?
But two sides to that answer. Some of the things we were talking about will be the same things we're talking about now, because moving the needle is going to be hard. In fact, people remind me when I say some of these things, they say, "Hey, I heard you talk about it 10 years ago." I heard you talk the same thing 10 years ago. How much progress have we actually made? So there'll always be that kind of drag in the changes. But I do think now the speed. You mentioned the transformation in the mindset around AI. That we never would it ever take over. Well, got to watch it because we have to worry about dishonesty. I see some uses of this that might be, really helpful to. And what I see happening now, even and great examples at the faculty level, is these tools that every faculty member I know has complained about how long it takes to grade things and the amount of time they spent grading and giving feedback. When that becomes aha moment for faculty, say, "Oh my, look at this." I almost would have said the same thing. I only changed 3 things in this because it's doing the work with you. We're going to have those conversations about how it changes workload and moving forward. I also think we're going to see some major changes in the way accreditors talk about what's quality education rather than inputs and processes. Going to be around outcomes. can these tools lead to better outcomes? Shorter time frames to get the credential, less expensive tuition, and I think I hope that we'll be talking about how do we make learning easier, and nobody wants to go there at this point. Of all the people I've interviewed and talked to, nobody wants to say, because that's a challenge to what we think about as rigor. We need to make learning rigorous. Why? Everything else is getting easier. Why are we so afraid to make learning easier? And I think the answer is because part of what people want us to do is sort. It goes back to elite institutions versus open access institutions, and how do we sort people unless we make some of these hurdles really hard that some of the people are going to fail. And that's a hard notion to get your head around. And I hope we're not talking about that, but we will be talking about how do we make learning both easier and I hope more enjoyable. Because that's what it's about. I mean, I kept learning because I love it. It's enjoyable, but the number of students that we encounter who don't find learning fun. School wasn't fun. It wasn't their first choice. They wanted to do something else. They went to school because they had to. How do we engage those learners in a way that makes learning both fun and easier for them to get their head around? So they develop the same kind of passion that Dr. Leftwich demonstrated to me when I was in junior college that changed my entire career trajectory. That's what I get excited about.
My last question, what are you reading at the moment?
I read a lot about AI. I read fiction. I'm reading background information for a book a fiction that I'm writing myself. So I like to read the historical background that can be shaped into your own fiction. So I'm 75% through with my next fiction. I have one fiction book out. It's the polar opposite of writing academic articles. And I'll tell you one point on this, and it is what I'm reading is history of Baltimore, where we built that school, some fictionalized accounts of those things over time. But I wrote a fiction about 10 years ago, and when they published it, they said, this is Dr. Andrews' first work of fiction. And I had a colleague from 20 years prior to that publication who wrote me immediately and said, I read your article from the 1980s, and this is not your first work of fiction. And it was an academic article. And that's not nice. That's really not nice. Not nice to say. But yeah, I think the combination of what could be, what could have happened, and what did happen is fascinating to me. So I'm always thinking those fronts.
David, thank you for giving me 50 minutes of your precious time. I hope that you've enjoyed the conversation as much as I have, and I look forward to seeing you on screen when we have AAB meetings at various times during the year.
And next time I'll have to ask you some questions.
Happy to. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
You have been listening to Studiosity's podcast, Reimagining Higher Education, candid conversations within higher education, sharing stories of leadership, change, and best practices in teaching and learning. Visit studiosity.com.